Welcome again, and we would like to start our amazing conference with our keynote speaker, Mr. Sankarsan Banerjee, who will talk about the hottest technology trends in e-commerce. Mr. Banerjee is the MD of Technology, Products and Cloud India lead at Accenture. Mr. Banerjee has built tech-centric businesses, managed tech teams, implemented mobile trading applications, SAP, ATG, and supply chain solutions. He was instrumental in helping Rediff launch India's first e-commerce site. He co-founded IndBazaar and played a key role with many other web presences in India and abroad, like Shoppers Stop, Sarekhan, JP Morgan Chase, Capital One Auto Finance, and others. More recently, he led the launch of Future Bazaar in 2006. Let's welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. Banerjee.
Happens so often in real life, the virtual world and the physical world are taking a little bit of time to coincide. In true e-tailing spirit, I put my presentation on Dropbox. But to actually display it, apparently you need physical presence. It has to drop from the Dropbox back here, and that's going to take a few minutes. Till then, let me introduce myself. Let me tell you a little bit more about life in general. So I'm Sankarsan Banerjee. Everybody calls me Shanky. I've been associated with Indian e-commerce for a while. The first e-commerce setup in India was Rediff. It was quite game-changing when it did come along. In those days, it was widely believed that the rules did not allow for e-commerce, primarily because there was no concept of electronic payments in India. This was 1995. And so Rediff did a very interesting workaround. They actually had a physical guy see the credit card number on the screen, punch it into a POS machine as if he was doing a point-of-sale transaction in a shop. And HSBC used to therefore treat it like a telesales transaction. And that is how e-commerce started. Of course, that punching guy could punch only about 10 or 12 orders a day, and which is pretty much all that Rediff got initially, but they soon grew out of it. And by then, the rest of the world caught up. So e-commerce has gone a long way from there. I believe that the busiest websites now do closer to 5 or 6 a second nowadays. And certainly I'm pretty sure nobody's sitting in the background punching it in anymore. So e-commerce, it is quite interesting to see how much, just from the logos, how much activity there is in India. And a large part of the theme of my keynote, when I do manage to put it up, is how we have progressed from being a startup environment to heading towards a mature business. In 1995, in 2000, just after the boom, there was a lot of disarray among the e-commerce companies as to what we were planning to do. We were still small companies trying out new ideas, trying out a market that did not exist. In 2013, that is no longer the case. The market quite clearly exists. The companies that service this market are now, by Indian standards, mid-sized, and some of them are heading to more than mid-sized. So the conference is no longer about startups. E-tailing in India has to start thinking now as if it's a mature business. And I've spent a lot of time in large IT companies. I've spent some time in a large retail company. And the difference between startups and large companies can be quite stark at the face of it. But fundamentally, the difference is that larger companies believe that their market is already here, and their job is to maintain their market share, build on their successes. Whereas a startup is focused more on building. He's like a small child that spends a lot of time crying to get attention. When we first started e-commerce, no bank would take us seriously, because he said, you do 6 transactions a day, 100 transactions a day, what will we offer you? So it took a lot of stretching, it took friends and family connections, it took, You have to persuade people on the basis of conviction. Today, you don't have to do that. Today, e-tailing is a mature business. All the players have started taking e-tailing seriously. And this is a relatively recent phenomenon. Even 5 years ago, Future Bazaar had a tough time getting any kind of recognition within Future Group, leave alone the outside world, because we used to have a turnover of, in those days, 4.5, 5 crores a month. And they would say 4 crores a month, that's a grocery store. That's like a kirana in the corner. And so it took a while before anybody would pay any kind of attention to you. Leave alone give you special, the bigger world would never give you any kind of special attention. And so you had to make a lot of disproportionate noise. That is no longer the case. Now, if you're in retailing, people don't say, we don't know what it is, we don't know whether it'll ever work in India. There are still challenges around commercial models, there's still challenges around making money, but that's true of every business. Every business, like even physical retail in India has plenty of challenges around making money. Nobody questions that it's a real business, but as we know from many examples of retail chains falling into tough times, that it is not very easy to make money in retail of various kinds, not just e-tailing. On the other hand, there are retailers like Zara has, if you noticed yesterday's article, has the turnover of a Tanishq in India. We're not talking worldwide. In India, a Zara store does as well as a jewelry store. And it's the most successful retail store of any kind, not just foreign brands, of any kind in India except Tanishq, which is a jeweler. Which is quite amazing. I mean, they came in from outside. They've of course been very successful worldwide. They came in from outside and they managed to overtake all except the one obsession that Indians still beat the world on. And worldwide, the most successful stores are Tiffany's and Apple. Jewelry seems to always be up there, but there is a lot of upside left even to a complicated Indian retail market. And we have to stop thinking of e-tailing as a separate industry or a separate niche. Finally, all of us, all of you, are participants in the overall retail revolution. The customer who buys clothes doesn't care whether he buys it online or offline. He buys clothes. That's his primary motive. Then he starts thinking, how should I buy clothes? So, we're getting quite far into my... hoping we have a little more on the Dropbox thing. You see, my company prevents me from using USBs on my laptop. So the only choice I have is this extremely cloud-centric manner. So anyway, all companies go through 4 stages of evolution. The first stage is the disruptor stage. When an idea is new and you take an idea and you start with a concept that nobody has tried before. So, to give a very common example, the iPhone 2 was a disruptor. It created a phone that nobody had ever seen before. Then disruptors eventually, either they become widely successful or they disappear entirely. Not every disruption works well. If they become successful, then eventually they go into a stage of innovation where they are still dramatically changing their product. But they're no longer disruptors. There is already a market. It's just that they are quite far ahead and they still have a lot of very dramatic improvements on that product. So again, to take the iPhone example, the iPhone 2 was the disruptor. Nothing like that had come before. Nobody even thought that a smartphone was really possible. Till then, candy bars, dumb phones ruled the world. And then iPhone 3 was a major change. It introduced the App Store, which was, nobody had heard of before. Now everybody, even desktop apps are bought through app stores. It introduced many other concepts that were completely brand new. And while not quite disruptors, were very sudden, large shifts in the way things were done before. Large innovations. Eventually, even large innovations settle down. The world catches up. You run out of such dramatic big new things to do in a particular area. Then you start in a phase where you improve on what you have, but you're primarily building on market share. And I see Dropbox has indeed produced a diagram for me. Then you start building on market share. You start to improve what you have, but you no longer have the luxury of doing dramatic innovation because what you have is already quite good. It's like a car. You know, the invention of the car was a disruption. The invention of mass production in a car was a major innovation. It changed the industry, it changed the way cars were consumed. Nowadays, it's very hard to make a very much better car. You can make a better car, but it will be a little bit better because the limit of car technology is pretty much been reached. Now, if you make something, it won't be a car, it will be a disruptor to the car economy. But that doesn't mean there's no money to be made. Obviously, car manufacturers continue to improve their cars. A car of 10 years ago and a car of today, there is a lot of progress. But it's at improvement stage. Indian e-commerce, I feel, is today at the improvement stage. We've gone, Rediff was the disruptor. It introduced the idea of e-commerce to India, but the real disruptor was Amazon. We were already connected to the global information economy. Everybody, by the time Rediff was launched, knew what Amazon was. So every one of Rediff's customers shopped because they had heard that Amazon has already introduced e-commerce worldwide. And this Amazon shadow lasted with us even today. Most people in India who shop retailing already know about Amazon and want to compare everybody to Amazon. And of course, we happily copy lots of the elements. Every retailer in the world copies lots of elements that Amazon originally innovated, the original disruptor. And just like Samsung copies so many things that go with the iPhone economy. Then it matured. There were large innovations that came after Amazon. There was, the most successful local innovation was cash on delivery. Cash on delivery changed the concept of Indian retail. Worldwide, Amazon came up with one-click ordering. It came up with quite a few other large innovations that we today take for granted. Marketplaces were an innovation. Today, worldwide, e-tailing is in improvement stage. E-tailers get better, but they get better recognizably. They are not dramatic shifts from the last round of retail. A technology, the improvement that happens on it is a retailer doing something different rather than some dramatic new avatar of a business. And that's where we are at India too. Yes, we have a lot of technology change, a lot of tweaks to the thing. We will have augmented reality and we will have this and we will have that. But those will be improvements on the fundamental retail model, which has now relatively matured and is going to stay with us. How do we change pages on this? So as you can see, we have a cycle. All businesses follow this cycle. And eventually, you end up in maintain phase, which means the product is pretty much what it used to be. So like a steel plant, right? It's the same steel. It's been the same steel for 50 years. But it's not that there is no money to be made still. Innovation has stopped, but the product is still useful. At some point, this will face a disruption. People will continue to produce successfully a product for the next maybe 20, 30, 50 years. And then a technology change will change the platform entirely. People will stop using steel and use carbon fiber, maybe. That disruption will again start the cycle. So I think we have passed this part. If you could go to slide, yeah, this one. So what do we mean by improvements in the e-tailing space? And I'm supposed to talk about technology trends, and that's what I'm coming to. A lot of people talk about technology trends in terms of augmented reality, in terms of 3D vision. But in the improvement phase, your real technology trend or your real use of technology comes from making what you already do well much better. An iPhone 5 is not a dramatic change, but it is a significant improvement from iPhone 4. Those improvements matter. That is what So a BMW of 20 years ago and a BMW of today, fundamentally there's been no engineering change. But the small improvements that have gone in have accumulated into a very, very nice car today, much nicer than a 20 years ago car. That is the phase you're in. Don't look for, I mean, of course, look for disruption, but you're in an industry that is mature. You will probably have much better returns from technology that improves what you do today, improves your supply chain, improves your cost control, improves your ability to connect with customers. And I'll talk a little bit about 4 technologies in those areas that I think will fundamentally, well, I won't change the way you think of things, but will considerably improve how you sell to your customers, connect with your customers, and survive as a business, hopefully to reach maintenance phase, which is when you're, when you know you have arrived. Then you're making steel for the next 30 years. So this part is the boring bit. The exciting bit is when you launch your company. The exciting bit is when you do disruption. The exciting bit is when you've done dramatic innovation. The boring bit is doing what you already do much better than the next guy. So we missed the title of this presentation. The title of this presentation was Becoming Adult. When we are babies, we can do a lot of things. We can play when we want. We can cry when we want. When you're teenagers, you're still growing, you're still learning. The boring bit comes when you first enter a job, when you suddenly realize you have to be in the same place at the same time every day for the next 10 years to have career growth. You can no longer, skip and go to the movies when you feel like. You have to be 9 o'clock at your desk. That's part of the boring bit. Indian industry now at e-tailing look to improve your boring bits. Look to improve your customer service by 10x, your supply chain by 10x. It's boring in the sense that it doesn't sound like technology innovation. But trust me, this is where grown-up companies have all their excitement. The reason Walmart is better than most retailers is because they do the boring bits brilliantly well. The reason why Zara is taking the pants off most other people who sell pants is because Zara is one of the world's best executors of a textile supply chain. Zara, in fact, did not have very much. It's a documented case study. For many years, they refused to go away from MS-DOS. They used to have a character-based, DOS-based textile retail chain software, which they refused to go away from. They went away only when they could not buy any more MS-DOS machines. Microsoft, MS-DOS. At some point, they couldn't find machines to buy that ran their MS-DOS, so they finally decided, okay, now it's time to shift. They are one of the most effective implementers of the boring bits. Next slide. So, I think there are 4 exciting, if you like, boring bits that we should look at to improve our lives in e-tail. One is brand journalism. Second is curated experiences. Then omni-channel engagement and seamless retail. Can we change this? Yeah. Okay, I wonder if any of you can read this. Okay, so brand journalism. So all of us know that brands are a very important part of retailing, right? You build a brand. So you start with brands that have attributes. This historically brands, for instance, a cigarette brand the attribute was cool. A health brand would be safe. A tire brand would be reliable. And then you start building from brand attributes, you start building brand personalities. You start personifying the brand. So, Michelin tires became the Michelin Man, and Marlboro became the Marlboro Man, and that kind of thing. You start putting a whole character around it, which represents more than just just individual attributes. Now you have, a visual representation, so to speak, of it. Then you move to brand content, which means a brand starts saying things. It is associated not just with a cartoon character or a person, but also with a set of messages. And Nike is very effective, for instance, at having very strong fitness content. It's no longer just about just do it. Nike's constant messaging is, how much have you run today? Have you, did you figure out what kind of running style you have? And did you figure out what kind of, whether you're doing the right thing with the right kind of anti-sweat t-shirt? And so there's a lot of content they distribute, which then starts getting associated with their brand. So when you see fitness, you think Nike. When you see fitness of almost any kind, basketball, cricket, football, you start thinking Nike. The last stage is brand journalism. Brand journalism is the ability to become authoritative in a subject, and that subject therefore becomes permanently associated with your brand. It's very hard to do, but it's incredibly effective if you can do it well. Once you get to brand journalism, you get mileage that is completely disproportionate to your original effort. And so the most famous case, none of you can read the print, of brand journalism did not happen recently. It happened 113 years ago. A company called Michelin, or Michelin, two brothers, they wanted to sell tires. And in those days, there were very few cars in France. So they said the best way to sell tires is to persuade people to do more things with cars. So of course they branded their tires, they had promotions, this, that. Then they started saying if people drive more and they have more things to do when driving, then people will buy more cars, and of course as they drive, they will buy more tires. So they started persuading their customers, their relatives, their friends to go around France and see different things. And eventually they came across the idea of recommending restaurants that they themselves had been to, they of course owned the cars, so driving distance away. In 1900, exactly at the turn of the 19th century, they decided to produce what is now known as the Michelin Guide. It has now become a tourism industry standard in the West. It's one of the most referred to guides in the world. It's now in its 109th edition. No, it's 112th edition. It missed a few years in the middle because of war, because of this and that. And of course, Michelin continues to sponsor it. And very few people in the world, Michelin has grown much beyond tires, but very few people in the world fail to know this name, Michelin. And it gives them enormous mileage. They're a tire company, but they're authoritative on food and travel. Of course, Michelin is a paid guide, but it doesn't make money. It is sponsored even now by the company by Michelin, by the tire company. That is brand journalism that is very hard to replace, replicate. You're not going to be around 113 years. Maybe I won't be around 113 years. Quite likely I won't be around. But that is the power of brand journalism. It's quite likely that the tire company at some point will die out, but the name Michelin will remain as a travel industry standard. Hopefully some of you will get to that. But the reason I'm bringing it out in an e-tailing conference is because digital allows you to build this much faster and much easier than Michelin had to do. Michelin had to hire, nowadays they have in the upwards of 300 people who go and eat at these restaurants. And of course they pay for their own meals, and these restaurants are not cheap. Because it's physical world, they had to put a lot of effort into printing all this, they had to put a lot of effort into distributing all this. Initially it was distributed free, 30,000 pamphlets. Their first run was 30,000, now the run is over 1 million. Digital, on the other hand, allows you to do this on a scale that even a Michelin would not think of today. Amazon is the best example of modern brand journalism. It's become the authoritative source for reviews on books. Not so much for other things, not necessarily for electronics. You would still go to other sites to research your electronics. But it is very unlikely that you will not consider Amazon as your top 2 or 3 when you're reviewing, when you're trying to figure out whether a book is good or bad. And Amazon has extended this by buying AllMusic, IMDb, all of which are attempts at increasing brand journalism. So if you become an authoritative source for whatever you're selling, that is going to give your brand a considerable boost. You're going to have to. Everybody's going to do brand journalism. It's not innovative in that sense. You're not going to be the only guy who does it. In fact, if you don't do it, you're the only guy who won't do it. Be sure you're good at it. The next thing is curated experiences. And I've put up one of the surveys that Accenture did at some point. Consumers are getting far more expressive through their purchasing in emerging markets than they used to be. Developed markets have always been, consumers, what they buy isn't so much what they like as what they want to express for themselves. So if somebody is buying organic products, of course, he thinks organic products is good for health. But actually, he's trying to communicate to the world that he thinks everybody should buy organic products because he cares about the universe. It's part of the messaging of almost every purchase that everybody does. The developed world has been very good at these messages, and the developing world used to be far more centered around direct satisfaction, not so much about the messaging of a product. Because, land of shortages, you're more worried about what food you are than what your food says about you. That has changed dramatically. As you can see, 54% explicitly buy products that express something about themselves. Clothes, music, food choices, housing choices. People buy houses because of the address they want to live at, not so much because of the inside of the house. People buy localities, they don't necessarily buy houses. Again, in the shortage economy, you would buy a house just because you could get it. You didn't really care locality as long as you had a roof over your head. As economies grow up, and emerging economies are clearly the rate of change is very rapid on this. So curated experiences are the opposite of the long tail. Long tail is about maximizing choice. I'm going to give you every possible book on earth. A curated experience says, I'm going to give you these 10 books I recommend. And by definition, a curated experience, if it is too large, is not going to be effective. It has to be small. It has to have a thread of selectivity around it. Let's go to the next slide. So you have to have options that are refined. Why? Because you're expressing that particular curated experience is a means of expression for the people who buy it. So you have to have a selection that has a refinement of a selection that has some expressive value. You need to have a long tail, of course. You need to have enough products in the basket, but you need to be able to produce a set of choices that are packaged in some manner. So Oprah's book club tied to Amazon is a good example. Amazon has every book on earth. Oprah's book club has only 100 books. But that is the selection. And then, of course, curated experiences are about tackling desire, not about tackling convenience. Retailing has always, has grown up and learned that desire is the most important driver of consumption. E-tailing grew up on the platform of convenience. We make retailing easier. You can do it at home. You can do it in the middle of the night. Yes, that is all good and well. But actually, people don't necessarily buy in the middle of the night if they don't have any desire to do so. So curated experiences are about focusing this desire. Nowadays, you already know you can buy in the middle of the night. There's no point trumpeting it 50 times over. You're not going to get any more sales just because you're still open in the middle of the night. You need to figure out what messaging, what curated message, what desire you are addressing. And in the desire space, people don't like very large choice. It has been repeatedly shown that, if you go into a store that has more choice than you can accommodate, that is you're used to, you will come out buying nothing. Because you get confused by choice. So every retailer also breaks up all their choice into smaller pieces. So customers are changing quite rapidly. And most companies, this is another survey we did, 10,000 customers 6,000 companies across the world. 74% say they don't quite understand what their customers are doing yet. The world has gone through a very rapid social change. People behave very differently now than they did a generation ago. And that change has caused a lot of, 3 generations ago, everybody understood what their customers would do next. Today, 74% say they don't understand. 80% say that they understand a little bit, but even what they understand, they're not taking advantage of. They're still following a model that was created a generation ago. And 40% say that a primary reason why their business is not growing as fast as it should is because of unpredictability of consumer choice. They can't figure out what the consumer wants next, and that's what's causing them to stall. This is probably going to be a huge challenge for you, even on retail. You are going to have problems where you are unable to progress because you do not quite understand what your consumer wants. And that's partly because of analytics being not yet there, but partly because historical change rates have grown considerably than they used to be in the past. So you need what we call omni-channel engagement. It used to be multi-channel, as in you could talk to a customer in any one of multiple channels. He could telephone you, he could email you, and nowadays, yes, to a certain extent, he can tweet you. The best companies now are doing omni-channel. That is, you can start a conversation on a tweet and continue it on the phone. You can start a conversation on the phone and then, somebody can tweet you back the answer. Omni-channel is harder to do, but also omni-channel is anywhere, anytime, and anyhow. You have to let the customer choose how he wants to talk to you. And that is the reason why today there's so much customer dissonance, because suddenly the number of customer communication channels has exploded. When we say tweet, actually we are saying of the order of 2,000 different social media channels, right? Of course, Twitter happens to be the largest, but it's very far from being the only one. Also, most people today track trends. We analyze social trends. We say how many people tweeted about a particular topic. But retailing is not about trends. Retailing is about talking to an individual, about taking a single conversation and making sure that that conversation is followed through in all the channels that is happening. It may even not be directly sent to you, but it is you're part of that conversation. Think of you as being in a crowded room, and if somebody talks about you, then you start trying to listen to what they were talking about and of course engage if possible. Then the other thing is hop on, hop off. People don't necessarily want to stick to one channel of communication. If they started on the phone and he wants to hang up, he should be able to continue the conversation in some other means. And this happens routinely in business, for instance. We start a conversation on chat and after a while we feel, no, chat is going too much. So let's call the guy up and conclude it. It's becoming too much chat. So we do it all the time in real life, in personal life. But no retailer offers it to us beyond a certain extent today. If you're on chat, you're on chat. If you're on voice, you're on voice. It's usually, separate people handle it, separate channels handle it, separate histories handle it. So that's not hop off, hop on. That is, you stay on the bus until you reach your destination. And of course, the idea is not just to respond to an individual conversation piece. It is to you want to connect with your customers. You don't just want to solve a customer complaint. You want your customers eventually to be loyal to you. Just like a Kirana store manages to connect with its customers on a level that most big brand stores cannot, e-commerce allows you to have individual conversations that you can then build into an actual connection, a relationship with an individual customer. Today, we are focused, all our business processes are focused around response. How quickly do we respond to an individual complaint? How many times has he complained and how have we settled it? So, the one example I've given here is Virgin America nowadays has a customer service department that tracks individual tweets. And there's an example that's been documented by the Wall Street Journal about how a person, it's not a false example, somebody actually did it. This woman discovered just before, on the way to the airport, that she had forgotten to book a wheelchair. She'd hurt herself and she needed a wheelchair and she'd forgotten to book it. So she tried calling, but of course that went into a call center. So out of frustration, she tweeted to Virgin, with the hashtag Virgin, that it would be great if somebody could get me a wheelchair. Virgin actually does have a department that tracks tweets, not for trends, but for individual actions. And there was somebody at the airport who said, you know, who is this, whose Twitter handle is this? He's ordered a wheelchair. So there was somebody with a wheelchair waiting for that Twitter handle to land up. It's not difficult to do. The tools, the technology actually is quite straightforward. All of you know how to do it. But it was quite revealing for the customer. And not many people do it. Burberry's has another example. Burberry's uses social media to figure out who they are talking to. So they have an iPad which if you enter some part of the information of a customer, it tries to pull, as just like LinkedIn or Rapportive or one of these other sites, tries to pull in as much information about the customer so that the salesperson, of course it's a human, it's not a robot, but the salesperson knows who he's talking to. Is he or she a businessman, executive, what has he done before, what does he like before, what does he talk about? That information allows, Burberry is a luxury store. Burberry's was doing very badly a few years ago. They were unable to connect with the new generation of customers. They were widely considered to be last year's fashion, last generation's fashion. Who buys raincoats anymore? But they've done a dramatic turnaround. Their share price has gone through the roof. And a large part of their strategy is this digital engagement strategy. Your clothes cannot be electronic. Delivering faster is not going to make you choose Burberry, that Burberry is almost 10 times more expensive than a standard raincoat. Just because it is delivered faster doesn't mean you'll pay 10 times as much. You need luxury, need connect, and that connect is provided by these methods. So another thing is, we keep hearing about showrooming. Showrooming is people who go to a store, look at a product, but then go online and buy it. Accenture did a survey some time ago and it had a very unusual result. 41% showroom. 88% do it the other way around. They go online, check the product, but buy it in a store. And this is worldwide. I'm sure in India it will be a higher ratio. So, actually you shouldn't be, you should not bother about retailers, obsessing about showrooming. You should be worried that you are losing to retailers much faster, more leakage than the other way around. This is why seamless retail is important. Now, many of you are pure retailers, so there's you are going to have to face this problem in manners that are more innovative than I can recommend here. But many of you are multi-channel. And seamless retail, the problem with either of these trends is that showrooming or webrooming doesn't guarantee that you will go back to the original brand. So Best Buy is one of those examples of a company that has suffered very badly from showrooming. People have, people go to Best Buy stores all the time in the worldwide electronic stores, and they don't buy. They go to compare on Amazon, and they go and buy on Amazon, or they compare, some other online site. So they have started becoming they started addressing showrooming not as something to be stopped, but as something to be enhanced. Showroom, but buy at a Best Buy site rather than some other site. So they make it easier for people to locate where on Best Buy's site this particular product is. They have QR codes. There are other companies that are doing this. You can just scan the code and it'll take you directly to the website, your website, that particular product on your website, and of course they show you comparative numbers. They'll show you what the price is online. Prices online are usually quite comparative. So that's how you prevent people from going away from it. So there are 6 key components to seamless retail, and I'm sorry you can't read this. The first is customer experience. You need to have consistent customer experience. In store, out of store, the experience must be, you must still feel like you're engaging with, let's say, a Best Buy. The experience must still be that you're engaging with the same entity. And that is not true of a lot of experiences. Future Bazaar is a great example. Future Bazaar was part of Future Group, but the identity was very distinct. Somebody who went to a big bazaar did not feel he was shopping at Future Bazaar, and vice versa. Somebody who shopped at Future Bazaar did not feel he was shopping at Big Bazaar. It was deliberate and it was a mistake. It wasn't seamless. And so we neither attracted the online site, or we were neither very good at attracting anything more on the online side because we had a physical presence, nor did the physical stores benefit from their online presence. The second is you need to the shopping must be connected. You know, all our connectivity today is online. You can send a product recommendation over Facebook, but provided it's online. You need to be able to connect the same connections offline and vice versa. If you can take a photo and mail it, you should be able to pin that photo online. So those interactivities, the connections, you have to build as part of a seamless retail. You must start thinking of a customer as a connection between the brand and the individual, rather than between the brand and between the individual and the channel. The channel is no longer as important. Then you have to be integrated merchandising, which means the same products must be available on both sides with similar pricing, similar promotions. You need to have flexible fulfillment and returns, similar experiences on fulfillment regardless of which channel you bought through. Buy from this channel, return to that channel. Walmart has started introducing cash payment at their stores and deliver online. Reverse of what it used to be. We used to have to pay online and deliver in the store. It's the other way around, and it's been very successful. Then you have personalized interactions. Just like you have online personalized, you can, a company like Burberry is now doing offline personalization using a very similar engine to a recommendation engine online. And you have better, faster, and more memorable experiences by combining the two. Finally, shopping is all about brand loyalty. You can shop the same thing or some equivalent of it elsewhere. It's very unlikely that you have a monopoly on anything. You have a monopoly on a particular brand, but the corresponding equivalent is almost certainly available somewhere else. So people buy where they have better experiences. So the last step, and I'm going to end here, I've been talking for quite a while, this is the most boring bit of all, but a lot of companies ignore it. Internally become a digital company. Become a purely digital company. Become a company that puts everything, location free, paper free. Don't have a separate IT department. As in, have separate IT personnel to manage your admin jobs, your batch processes and your servers and this thing. But we have, for instance, traditional companies have silos called marketing, who don't know anything about IT, and IT who don't know anything about marketing, and marketing gives requirements to IT, and then a report gets built. Remember, you are the digital companies. You're expecting your customers to do everything electronically, but you often forget that you can do the same thing electronically. Marketing should be able to generate its own reports. Build the organization that way. Nothing is rocket science. Most people in retailing companies are tech savvy enough to run fairly sophisticated analysis on their own, but companies are usually not built to do that. Companies are usually built for the marketing guy to ask the technology guy to generate the report for him. Now this has though it doesn't look like anything directly consumer facing, the fact is you will not understand the connected consumer unless you yourself are connected in real life. You realize in a detailing conference, I put a presentation on cloud and it took a considerable time for that presentation to appear in usable form. We are not internally as connected as we want to be. It should be second nature. It should be pretty straightforward to do. And it's a process issue. It's not technology. The technology exists quite happily. That's it. That's my keynote for the day.
Thank you so much, Mr. Banerjee. That was a great and exciting start to our conference. Let's put our hands together again for Mr. Banerjee.